Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Hobby Hour. My name's Kirk Watson. I'm the founding dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. The Hobby Hour is something we do every month on the third Wednesday of the month, and we do it at noon. We have discussions about policy and politics, and it's always a very informative, but also a lot of fun. At the Hobby School, we believe that public policy education ought to reach outside the walls of a public policy school and be a source of information. The education we provide, the research that we do, but we want to be relevant and we want to have a bias toward action. And that's what this webinar is about. So today we have two people that this ought to be we ought to have a fun hour coming up. We've got two folks that are from the Texas Senate. They both chair their respective caucuses in the Senate, and I'll introduce them in more detail, but Senator Paul Bettencourt is the chair of the Republican caucus in the Texas Senate, and Senator Carol Alvarado is the chair of the Democratic caucus in the Texas Senate. If you have questions, this is supposed to be an interactive webinar, so what I hope you'll do is you'll put questions in the Q&A part of that, and I'll try to, as we go along, I'll try, as long as they're not filibustering me on some answer they're given, I will do my best to work those questions into what we're doing here. Otherwise, toward the end of this thing, we'll just pause and ask the questions that you've posted. Let me introduce these two guests. Now, first of all, you need to know I've served in the Texas Senate with both of them. I consider them both to be good friends. And they're good friends. And so this ought to be a kind of a lively conversation. And I'll just say it out loud. It's neat for me to have these two former colleagues be part of this hobby hour with me. So I want to tell them both I really appreciate it. Senator Paul Bettencourt, I'll go in order of seniority here in the Senate. Senator Paul Bettencourt he was elected to the Senate in 2014. He represents Senate District 7, which is located in Harris County. He previously served 10 years from 1998 to 2008 as the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector. He is the chair of the Senate Committee on Property Tax, and he serves on the Senate Finance Committee, Education, and Higher Education Committees. He's also on the Redistricting Committee, and we're going to talk a little bit about redistricting. He has a Bachelor of Science from Texas A&M University in Industrial Distribution. And he's the president and CEO of a tax consulting company in Houston that has grown to 40 employees. He also is a radio and TV guy. You can hear him on the radio. In fact, I've been on his radio show and look forward to being invited again. Senator Carol Alvarado, who I've told you is a Democratic caucus chair, she represents Texas Senate District 6, which also is in Harris County, and was first elected in a 2018 special election. In 2008, she was elected to the Texas House of Representatives, and she served 5 terms representing a Harris County district, District 145. In the House, she served as chair of the Urban Affairs Committee and as co-chair of the Select Committee on Transportation and State Agency Operations. She was also a member of the Houston City Council from 2002 to 2008. In the Senate, she serves on the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, the Nominations Committee, Transportation, and Water and Rural Affairs. And she is also an appointee by the Lieutenant Governor to the Redistricting Committee. She has an MBA and a BA degree, both in political science from the University of Houston. And so she's you have to look at her. She's got all the red on.
Okay, she's better dressed. All right.
She's got us both beat, although I can go get my hobby school gimme cap and we'll be ready to go.
Okay.
So like I say, I'm excited about having these two on. And the way I want to start is I want to start the discussion by talking about how this interim has been. We're focused on the session, but as you two, I think, will tell us and agree with me, so often, much of what happens in the session occurs as a result of what has happened in the interim since the last session until now. Of course, this interim has been very, very unique, not just because we had the typical slowdown of an interim when you have an election year, particularly a presidential election year like we've had this year, but also because obviously the reason we're doing the hobby hour remotely, and that is because of COVID-19. So let's start with the interim. And I'll start, Senator Alvarado, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you give us your thoughts on how the interim has been and what that portends for the upcoming session? How do you see that making the session different? And then Senator Bettencourt, I'll ask you to follow up.
Thank you, Dean Watson. But before we go there, let me thank you and congratulate you. You just in your short time there, you created this wonderful hobby hour. And speaking of hobby, it's so appropriate that you have two of us from the Senate, because the hobby school is named after Lieutenant Governor Hobby, the longest serving Lieutenant Governor in Texas. And I want to congratulate the Hobby School for some of the wonderful studies you've done on COVID and Hispanic entrepreneurs, and then just the issues that are pressing upon the Lone Star State. And congratulate Elsa Gonzalez, your researcher, who's getting that grant from the NSF. Look, this interim has been none like any other. It's been a roller coaster ride. We've had to be quick on our feet, very responsive and reacting to some very crucial needs. From day one, our office was engaged in some very aggressive distributions of masks and food and goods that people needed, cleaning products. And then we started shifting towards trying to find more permanent solutions for people. We held a job fair in early September, recognizing that 3.9 million Texans have filed for unemployment, record-breaking numbers there. And we brought together about 37 corporations representing 1,700 jobs available. We had over 700 participants. It was a success. We're going to do another one. But in the midst of all that too, we had briefings, and Paul and I were constantly on phone calls, whether it was with our caucus, with the Lieutenant Governor, with TDM, and so many.
TDM is the Department of Emergency Management.
Right.
With Chief Nimkid and all of our responders, and then with local government entities, with Mayor Turner, with County Judge Hidalgo. The calls in the beginning, those first few months, it was nonstop. And then we were introduced to, voila, Zoom. And here we are later. And so, also adjusting to having to work remotely and how you deal with that with your staff, making sure that the phone is still answered. So people calling, because we recognize that people, sometimes they just wanted to be heard. They wanted somebody to listen to them. And that's real important to me in our district, and making sure that we could also help people through the bureaucracy of getting their unemployment claims dealt with. I mean, this was such an issue that our own offices, and I'm sure Bettencourt's office as well, other Senate offices, we lent our staff to the Workforce Commission to help with the load. Yeah. And it wasn't just about having enough human power, on the phones, but it was also the software that we realized that the Texas Workforce Commission had some really, outdated equipment. And, we as a legislature need to pay attention to those things. Should there be another pandemic, or even those of us here on the Gulf Coast, when we go through hurricanes and we know that we have to hunker down for a while, what that means. So we are now, rolling up our sleeves, getting ready for the session. Yeah.
Senator Bettencourt, what do you add to that about how the interim has felt and been, and what it's going to mean session-wise?
Interim, I thought we've been in session all this time. Yeah. It's been that intensive. I mean, Senator Alvarado's laughing. We've been on what I think has been an extended special session since March. And one of the things that we can, agree on, I know Senator Alvarado, is jobs, because that's really what's been at risk with all of this, besides the obvious medical, severity and the loss of life. And for example, she mentioned unemployment. Well, the top 3 Senate districts with the most unemployment are it's Senator Bettencourt, Senator Boris Miles, and Senator John Whitmire. I think Carol's lucky enough to be down about 12th out of 31 on that.
No, we're actually at number 6 now. We started.
Oh, wow.
12.
Okay. So
and part of what's important about what you just said is everybody, for those that may not know, every senator, so 1, 2, and 3, and 6, those are all Senate districts located in Harris County.
Right. Because we've got a double whammy. It's not just COVID. We've got an energy shock that was literally of, at one point biblical proportions, because we actually had negative sales on per barrel oil prices for a couple of days. Now, I do want to extend my congratulations, Dean, for being the founding dean of the center, as Senator Alvarado did. We're both proud of you because it's important to have discussion. And as the Republican and conservative in the audience, I want to recognize your poll from the Hobby Center was like the best one that predicted a 5-point Trump win. So you were way out on the competition. So I'm sure that makes, Doc Murray and the rest of the squad happy, but you all nailed it actually on that. And going forward from all of this, we're really still in what effectively has been a long special session. We've had to maintain a property tax system through all of this. We've got job issues. Senator Alvarado was right. We had to loan our staff to the Workforce Commission so people could get their benefits. There's nothing worse than being out of work and you can't get government on the line to get your benefits. And that was, some antiquated software. And of course, when you look at government's response, one thing that everybody needs to understand, at least as somebody that is always looking for more efficiency or zero-based budgeting, et cetera, we don't really think ahead. Oh, we've got a COVID crisis. What's the next step? Basically, everybody waits to get hit. But we had record unemployment claims, but both parties pitched in to answer the phone calls, because when you've got a crisis like this, you can either do nothing and that's a stupid response, or you can do real things for real people. And both the Democrat senators and the Republican senators did it, because we literally cannibalized our own workforce to make sure that Texans that couldn't get through to get their benefits could get answered. And we're still doing those calls today.
Sure. No, and for folks to know, but y'all confirm what I'm saying here. What happened was the Senate offices and I guess some in the House, I don't know. I just was more familiar with the Senate because I was transitioning at the time to the hobby school from the Senate. But the senators had their staffs go through specialized training so that they would be able to answer the telephones and do that kind of thing. So, and that's why, I think it's important when I talk about the interim, a lot of people don't know what's going on. Well, typically what's going on is there's a lot of work in preparation for the session. This interim, there was less of that, but there was a lot of work that had to go into dealing with public policy and meeting people's needs during a pandemic. You agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been, squeezing in time to get our bills filed, hire up staff, just get your personal business in order at home, get your place that you're going to be living for the next several months in order. There's a lot of preparation, even without a pandemic. You put this on top of it, and an economic crisis in our state and our country, and it certainly adds to the many challenges that you face.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of the substantive things that might come out of the legislative session, including what the reaction is to COVID. But I want to start with when the session starts, because again, we're still doing things remotely. We're being told that this holiday season we could see spikes in illness, hospitalizations, and death, and those spikes could all be occurring about the time the legislature is supposed to convene. So what I'll start with you, Senator Bettencourt. I want to talk about what that's going to look like when you all show up. And I know y'all are still, I think I know that y'all are still working on what the rules might be and protocols, but not so much from a substance standpoint. Let's talk about the function of how you see a session like none we've ever known operates in a pandemic?
Well, first off, let's recognize the obvious that the COVID pandemic has accelerated dramatically people's use of virtual, like Zoom, whatever else. Also, tons of transactions, business transactions are done online. There's been a wide and ubiquitous use of online services across not just government, but in the private sector, to the point where we're probably going to have a commercial real estate slump in Houston because we've got much less need for footprint in office buildings because people are doing work from their home. Okay, Dean. All right. Anyway, so yeah, I can see some of the accoutrements on his shelf, so that's why I'm teasing him.
Yeah, no, right at home.
And so I think the Capitol grounds are just opening up this week. There's meetings going on between the Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor about what things will look like on the floor. Really, what we've got now is a race between the vaccinations that are just starting this week and how fast that can occur. Obviously, the priority is not the legislature, but it's the first responders and especially the medical staff that have been in harm's way for 8 months. So we're going to have as a former finance committee member, you remember how intensive those hearings are. The Senate is going first. Chairman Nelson has done a tremendous amount of work in the off season. And we're going to be having those hearings, except we're now spread out on 2 floors with plexiglass everywhere. And there'll be virtual people on the screen, as well as, I assume, some people actually be testifying in person. But it's like everything. This will be a different session. And importantly, I think we'll be doing the budget first because redistricting, the data apparently is delayed. I think, Carol, you had a discussion in your caucus that we may not get the data till July.
Right.
Right. So what that means is instead of having to do 2 huge things at once, we're going to do 2 things in series, budget and then the session first, and then obviously some type of redistricting special session.
So Senator Alvarado, following up to what he just said, he was talking about the way there's the anticipated way hearings can be held. I know that a group here in Texas called Texans Care for Children, they joined with, like 70 plus organizations calling for public participation and transparency in the way, how they didn't want that to go away. Of course, I don't think any of us do. We want to make sure that our government's making decisions in a transparent way and that the public has a right to weigh in. What are y'all talking about how you do that and assure transparency and public participation when we are under these kind of circumstances? And the vaccines, while the vaccines have started, most folks aren't anticipating everybody being vaccinated until about the time the legislature is supposed to sine die.
Right. And I know at least for the redistricting committee, we're going to start hearings in, I think that maybe that last week in January. I think it's proposed perhaps on Fridays. And all of that testimony will be taken virtually. So you may have a day where the senators, we will be live and in person in Austin, but we will travel virtually around the state to take testimony. As you well know, how important public input on redistricting is to the process. And for other hearings, that's still a little unclear, but we could be looking at some sort of a hybrid system where, depending on the issue and how much testimony it produces, you might have some virtual, some in person. So that hasn't been worked out yet, but that seems to be, I think, the place where we're just not real sure how that's going to pan out.
Is y'all sense that as a result of what we're facing, I mean, we're dealing with what we've got. Is it your sense that there will be far less bills actually end up referred and getting through committee and then making it to the floor just as a result of the difficulty from a functional standpoint of dealing with it the way we normally would deal with it.
Well, let me just say this, there's far less bills filed now. That much I can tell you for sure, because I filed one, and Carol, we're like on number 287, which is, and that counts, you know, our friend Senator Zaffarini, she always has about 100 to put in at the very first.
At the very beginning.
And this goes to what Senator Alvarado was talking about. Everybody has been so busy trying to handle these other crises. Right. I mean, so for example, like on property taxes, we were going to have hearings around the state. We ended up basically being virtual, where if a city was considering going above the rollback rate or going to the old rollback rate above the voter approved rate, we'd literally be on with them and tweeting live. Now, that actually worked out pretty well. Okay, so because over half the cities decided not to go above the new voter approved rate. So look, everything has a way of adapting. We're going to take real person. There'll be real testimony too in some hearings, but obviously you have to look at what the risk to the public is of bringing large numbers of people together, at least early on. So my guess is the first 60 days will be will be a little slower than it was before. But if you're on the finance committee, there's no difference.
Well, that's because that is the one thing, other than everybody has to deal with redistricting, but the budget is the one thing that has to be done. Right.
So for the Senate and the House trade terms, Carol's been in both, so she knows. And this year it's the Senate will go forward. So that means we have to start with a budget. Effectively, what's happened with Chair Nelson and is that they've already kind of done a pre-budget, and then they bring in each of the state agencies one by one, and we go through. And Kirk, you've seen, because some of the more humorous days have been Senator Bettencourt and Senator Whitmire barbecuing bureaucrats for not answering questions. All right. Carol's not on, otherwise she would have enjoyed that as well, I assume. But because you have to get to the bottom of this when we're dealing with, like, why can't you answer phone calls on unemployment benefits? The big issue we had 2 years ago, if you remember, was, child protective services. Yeah. And it would just literally drive all of us crazy, which is, why can't you get the job done with this tremendous more amount of money we're giving you?
Yeah.
And so we're going to go through all of that no matter what. I'm just catching up, looking at bill filings myself now. Because my guess is that the data you need to do redistricting with, and the public testimony is very important. And Chair Huffman has talked about, Carol, I think with y'all, about virtual testimony, but there are no maps because there's no data. Anybody that right now says they've seen a map is an absolute liar, because there isn't a map, okay? Because we're still dealing on 2018 data, which has my district slightly overpopulated. I think, Carol, you're slightly under.
You're right.
Right, but we don't even have the community survey data from 19, much less the census data yet. And if it doesn't get there by about April the 1st, we can't do it in the regular session. We just don't have enough time. So this is going to be strung out just like this whole double whammy economic COVID shock year. It's going to be stretched out. All the legislative activities are going to be stretched out next year in 2021.
Yeah. So talk to me about the rules. I know that's always, a controversial aspect and of the way the Senate begins, but it's my understanding from what I've read that there's going to be some potential changes to the rules. And the one I'm talking about, you guys know, but for those that are watching, the Senate has had a tradition that before a bill makes it to the floor, it has to, the rules have to be suspended, because the bills are supposed to go in a specific order. And in order to bring your bill to the floor, you have to suspend the rule and take your bill out of order, because typically a blocker bill is put up. That used to be known as the 2/3 rule. That changed from 2/3 to 3/5. And now there's talk of dropping that again so that it makes it. Well, I'll let y'all talk about that. I've got my point of view, but without me doing that, let me play the moderator. And
well, Carol, if you want to go first, or I'll go first.
You don't want to go first? Oh. Hey, I'm ready to go on this one. Look, I don't know what problem anyone is trying to fix here. I think having it at 19 has worked well. It forces you to work in a very bipartisan way to build consensus. We have to talk to people on the other side of the aisle. You know, we have to do more of the talking because last session there were only 12 of us. So we really had to go and work Senator Bettencourt and his caucus members. So there's more, I think there's more invested when you do that. There's more relationship building. You take time to get to know people because you're going to have to go and talk to them and ask them for something. So I'm not sure, you know, what's broken. I don't think the Senate was operating in such a dysfunctional way that we have this big problem and now we have to go change it and move it to 18. You know, Senator Watson, I was looking at the Journal last night and reading your debate on the floor when it was being proposed back in 2015, and you made some excellent points, and many of your colleagues did too. And that seemed to be the theme, is that this is working. You know, in Texas, we say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And just keeping us from becoming like Washington, where there's hardly any bipartisanship. Everything is a divided line. It's so partisan. People don't talk to each other. They don't dine together. They don't do anything together. In Texas, we're still holding on to that. But efforts like this will chip away at it.
So that people will know.
And I mean, if I were in the Senator Bettencourt shoes, I would be leery of this. I was reading a very good op-ed by some of your former Senate colleagues, Ratliff, Sibley, Ogden, Duell, and Estes. And boy, they made some really good points in their op-ed. And they said that the purpose for having such a rule is to, and I'll just quote it, to cool down some of the favored legislation filed in the Senate or passed by a simple majority in the Texas House. So it kind of acts like the calendars committee, like the House does, like the House has. So
yeah. Well, and Senator Bettencourt, before I go to you, before I do that, I want to make sure everybody understands what Senator Alvarado just mentioned. The 12 being 12 Democrats. There were 12 Democrats. That's right. Now that's so what that means is, yeah, there are 31 members of the Senate. There are 31 members of the Senate. When there was a 2/3 rule, it required 21. That got dropped to 19 because that would have allowed the Republicans to bring a bill to the floor without the necessity of a single Democrat. In fact, for a while, they could lose one Republican and still bring it to the floor. But what happened is in the last election cycle, the Democrats now have more members. And so one more, that's right, picked up one more member, and so the proposal is to drop it to 18, and by dropping it to 18, again, the Republicans will not need a single Democrat to bring a bill to the floor, so the Democrats wouldn't be allowed to block a bill. And I just want to make I just want to make that clear about how those numbers play out. Senator Bettencourt, what do you think about that rule change?
Oh, if y'all are through filibustering, can I get in?
I'm not. That's right. She's right. She's right. I gave a great speech.
It was a great filibuster back then.
Yeah, anyway. but you notice the rules got changed anyway. So
right. Yeah. Now, the same thing's probably going to happen here. Okay, I think that we're going to go to an 18 rule. Now, let me explain a couple things for the people watching. Unlike what happens in the federal Congress, this is not a closure to debate. It's actually a preventative to bring a bill up. It's a different theory, okay? Now last time, Carol, how many bills we have? 1,600, I can't remember. If you're looking at the Journal, you can refresh my memory.
Yeah, I do.
There was only about 26 that are actually taken on a pure partisan vote. So when you look at the comment about, well, what are we changing because stuff was broke? Well, when we go from 19 to 18, we're really not changing much. Okay, it's you know, there will be an X number of partisan vote bills. There will be a huge, expansive super majority, 98% plus of the bills that won't be. And look, and these are the type of things where we will disagree, okay? But I always have shot straight with both you guys when you were caucus chairs when I went back then, and that appears to be the direction we're heading. I really don't think that it changes when it happens. I understand Senator Alvarado, Chair Alvarado's comment about chipping away, okay? And I don't believe that it will change much on the floor, but you have to understand, Lieutenant Governor Patrick came from, you know, a time when the property tax relief bill was stopped last decade by the blocker bill, okay? We got a vote that was unanimous out of the House for property tax relief a decade ago. And he campaigned on it. And actually, he was the one vote, you remember this, Kirk, because you were there. And I think maybe, Carol, you might have seen him, because he got up and said, I hate the blocker bill, I'm voting against it. And the vote was 1-30, okay, against it. So he's had a long history of not liking that bill. And I'm hopeful that the real change between, you know, 19 and 18 is 61.2% of the body versus 58, okay? So as a math guy, I don't believe there'll be any real change in how the Senate operated from this session to last session, but, you know, we'll wait and see how the vote turns out.
Well, I think I know how it's going to turn out, but I wanted to hear y'all's point of view on that.
So Paul, why not? Let's just go on. You know, instead of chipping away, let's just let it rip. Let's just go to 16.
Well, because I think, and you know this, Carol, because we've talked about it. There are a lot of our colleagues that really think that having that rule is a good way to slow down debate, as the dean said earlier. And I don't think there's a whole bunch of people ready to go to majority rule. Now, we're going to find out what that means, depending upon how the Georgia Senate races break, because of majority, you know, now minority, but, you know, could be majority, Schumer's desire to wipe that, you know, closure, you know, stuff off. So I think a one step doesn't change things much, but obviously going to a full majority type situation you'd probably have to have a calendars committee, which is what you referred to earlier, Carol, because that's how they set bills in the House. Mm-hmm. But that's not being contemplated now.
So let's talk about the substance of the session. And by the way, those that are watching, I'm paying attention to the ones that have put questions in, and we will get to your questions. But
well, Carol and we're paying attention too. If you have
there you go. So, if you have questions, send them our way, and we'll try to make sure they get answered by these two leaders in the Texas Senate. So Carol, I'm going to start with you, but I want to ask you. I'm sure you've pre-filed some bills, mm-hmm. and for those who are watching, even though the legislature is not in session, members of the Senate can file bills in advance. There's a calendar time that works on that, and we're in that period of time where you can file bills. The beginning has already passed. So I'm going to ask you both. Give a little rundown on whether you've pre-filed. At least in my past experience, I might not have pre-filed some bill that was a priority of mine. But what are your top three priorities, both of you? And I'll start with Carol, Senator Alvarado. What are your top three priorities going into this from a substantive standpoint?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to narrow it down to just three. So many needs. We have filed our Medicaid bill once again for the expansion. I started that when I was in the House, and you know, Texas is now just one of 12 states. I think Oklahoma and Missouri were the last ones to expand Medicaid. This should not be a partisan issue, but for whatever reason, it has become one since the decision was made by those in charge and here in the state of Texas, there's been $70 billion left on the table. If we expanded Medicaid, there are about 954,000 Texans that would be eligible to enroll. Right here in Harris County, that would be over 223,000 people that would be eligible to enroll for Medicaid. What this COVID has taught us is that we have many health disparities in our state. I've known that, many of us have known that, but the pandemic has shined a pretty bright light on that. And there's no doubt that if we had more people with coverage, maybe some of those health disparities would be reduced and people would get preventive care and be healthier. We know that Texas has the largest population before this pandemic hit of uninsured people. So I'm looking forward to hopefully a very robust debate on it. I think I'm hearing that there are folks on the other side of the aisle that are opening up to the idea. So I'm looking forward to that. Today we filed our online voter registration bill. I've been filing that in the House for many sessions. And look, we do everything online. My hope is that we can do that. And if you look at it from an economic standpoint, if you process it online, it's about 3 cents versus the way we do it now, it's about 83 cents. So Senator Bettencourt, do the math. You're a mathematician guy, you're a numbers guy.
80% savings.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a huge savings. So that would also, help some of our county governments with their budget. And then also some workforce issues. Several sessions I've passed bills tackling the issue of making sure that we have a skilled and prepared workforce. I want to continue to build on that. I'm very grateful that we've had companies like Hewlett-Packard that have recently announced they're moving to Houston. That's more jobs. We have to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve and training people. A couple of sessions ago, I passed a bill, Recruit Texas, and that was to help businesses moving to Texas to help identify the skill sets that they would need, and they would be able to get grants from the Workforce Commission, partner with vocational and training, technical training institutions, our community colleges, to get their workers trained so that when they physically moved here, they had the workforce ready to go. Last session, I passed a bill creating an industrial apprenticeship grant program, again, tackling the issue of having a trained and prepared workforce. The Workforce Commission just adopted the rules last week, so I'm looking forward to really highlighting that, maybe getting some money into that program. But we have to look at the industries that really hurt the most, that were failing during this pandemic, and then those emerging industries. And how do we take people from, say, the oil and gas sector to get them retrained, repurposed, and move them into something else that is emerging? So those are, I have other issues, but I'd say those are some that I'm really focused on right now.
That's great. Paul, Senator Bettencourt,
Well, let me take up with this, because Carol and I agree on the training side, but I strongly disagree with the Biden's administration, the focus on transitioning the oil industry out, okay? Because we just can't afford that from an economics perspective. Plus, it doesn't make any sense for macroeconomics, because right now our oil pricing is in the 40s, and we need it for plastic feedstocks and all the other things that we get from that natural resource. But she brings up a point like, the phone right now for the governor is ringing off the wall with people coming in from California. HP Enterprise is a group that's coming to my Senate district. They just got out of California. They just couldn't stand the taxes. They had no power. Imagine being a major server operation and trying to do a big global, SAP integration, and your power's turned off because they turned off the power. I mean, they just ran away. Okay, and they didn't ask for any money from the governor's aisle to do it. They just came. Same thing we've seen with Oracle coming into Austin. Okay, which is, by the way, Carol's got a great picture of the Capitol there. You know, it's not that Ellison's coming. He's going to Lonnie in Hawaii, where he owns like 98% of the island, but everybody else is coming to Texas. And this is great. But retraining somebody on a Microsoft platform won't replace a $100,000 a year oil field job they have. So we have to keep this in balance. That's because I know what the impact has been in the energy corridor. It's been pretty devastating. Now, on some bills, just real fast, that I've already filed, you'll love this one, Kirk. I'm trying to get tax increment reinvestment zones being subject to open records. Shock and horror that government actually has to respond to an open records request.
As you know, that's one of my pet peeves and one of the things that you and I worked together bipartisan-wise in the Senate on.
Well, and Carol knows this, that when people have real expertise, like you in open records, we'd all come in with our open records questions to our Democrat colleague because he knew the answers, regardless of what partisanship. So we've got that. I think we've got a bill that had already filed. I think that we need an Office of Inspector General in the Education Department because it handles $60 billion a year. We've got problems with public schools, charter schools, wasting money. You know, we need best practices. So that bill's been filed with about 10 bipartisan co-authors on it. I do have an election bill that Carol's not signed on to, which we're going to have a discussion over what is the right role of government in, should we be mailing out absentee ballots in mass like popcorn to 2 million people? I don't think we should, but we're going to have certainly an earnest debate about that. And I've got a bunch more stuff coming as well because we've been delayed on it. And there's going to be a lot of discussion, and here's why, of all these bills, and Carol knows this too. We're tracking about $20 billion worth of COVID money that's come into Texas for governments, hospitals. The governor's got 6.8 billion that has to be spent by the end of the year. We're awash in federal money, but it can't be used for revenue replacement, okay? So we're gonna watch all these things come to roost. So the debates like about, I think what will eventually settle what's left of the Obamacare debate, or really the Affordable Health Care Act, is there's that one major suit that's outstanding that the Supreme Court's looking at. I think that's going to get settled this year for sure. So we're awash with federal money, but we can't use it for revenue replacement. And then what happens next year with any federal stimulus? So far, the Congress has been log jammed on that. I expect that to continue through the holidays. At least we'll see what happens in the first of the year.
So along those lines, one of the big transformational bills that passed last session that had been worked on for multiple sessions, including the session before when the Public School Finance Commission was created, was the HB3 passed last session. And at the time, a lot of us were talking about with all the changes. I mean, it changed the way teachers got paid and their salaries. It changed property taxes. It changed the way the formulas work. It was transformative in a lot of ways.
Everything.
It changed everything. But a big concern was, will there be a commitment to this session after session? And then, of course, COVID has happened. Mm-hmm. Senator Bettencourt, I'll start with you. What happens to HB3 in this session?
Well, first off, the combination of HB3, which was a complete overhaul of the education system, including the state recognizing the obvious that we had to get off of Robin Hood and wean ourselves off of that, because we don't have time to go into this, but we used to balance the budget basically on the backs of the local taxpayers by the tune of X 2, 3, 4 billion a year. We put in $5 billion for tax relief, and anything above a hard 2.5% increase in revenue in ISD, the state takes over, and that keeps people's tax bills from going through the roof, because as values go up, tax rates come down, which was really what SB2 did, that I got 21 votes for it, could have gotten a couple other votes for SB2. As values go up, property tax rates come down. And by the way, the combination of that never been done before anywhere we can find since World War II in any state in the union. They haven't done property tax reform at the same time they did education reform. Now, as somebody committed to property tax reform, I'm going to do everything I can to maintain that $5 million of property tax relief in the in the package. Now that package, I think that was unanimous vote. Carol, wasn't it HB3 on the Senate floor?
Yes.
Right. So that had the combination of the economic conservatives got their property tax relief, and everybody else got their changes they wanted. So there's going to be a lot of effort, at least by one senator, trying to make sure that stays whole, because that's an important change, and I think for the better. In that previous interim, I think myself, Senator West, and Senator Taylor, we were on that giant committee forever in testimony to get to that point, and there were a lot of good things that changed. So look, I think we've got a 5% across the board cut in agencies. I think that generates a few billion. And as a zero-based budgeting guy, I'm always ready to go tackle a budget, because we've got priorities that we pass that we should try to protect. And obviously one of them is property tax relief, at least for me. Carol,
Senator Alvarado, what do you think about HB3?
I applaud both of you for the effort, all the work you put in leading up to the passage of HB3. But for folks in my district and teachers, that meant a very healthy pay raise for our teachers. We're still not where we need to be, but I know a lot of educators appreciated that we are continue to invest in them. Things like all-day pre-K. I don't want those things to go away. We have to make sure that we can find a permanent, steady, reliable revenue stream to keep all these things in place. And, I want to just shift just a tiny bit, but
sure.
Before the pandemic hit, I know the governor talked about making this the session for higher ed. Yeah. And I hope that there's some place in there where we can focus on higher ed a little bit, and I know all my U of H alum folks will appreciate this, but a couple of sessions ago, I filed the bill to bring some equity to create a second PUF fund so that universities like Houston, Texas Tech could benefit. So I hope we're able to maintain what we have in HB3 and then also look at opportunities for higher ed.
Speaking of higher ed, one of the questions we've had from the audience relates to TRBs, tuition revenue bond. We started calling them something different because they're not really tuition revenue bonds, but TRBs, which allow for those that are listening, in order for universities to build new buildings, and they have to get those approved. The legislature has to sign off on those in advance. That's it in a nutshell. Senator Bettencourt, we'll start with you. Are you supportive of TRBs for higher education institutions?
Not in this session. I'm just telling you flat, both Carol and the dean know me, that you ask me a question, I'll tell you what I'm thinking. And here's why. We're in the middle of understanding a huge change in the economy and how we teach, okay, as well, and on education. The footprints that we thought we needed to have for giant bricks and mortar, okay, we're not using them right now. Look, I mean, no offense, we're on Zoom here on this call. We're not using all that bricks and mortar. So I think we need to take time to slow down and see what it is that we need higher education to do in this post-COVID world, okay? And I'm not trying to say that it's not a priority. I just can tell you that, I mean, look, as a property tax guy in Houston, the footprints that people are talking about that they need in business are 1/3 of what they used to be. I mean, these are titanic shifts in marketplace and the use of physical assets. So, I mean, I'm open. I'll listen to a pitch because, there's always, we've got such a huge system with multiple systems. I mean, a higher education system, there's always somebody in a pinch. that really has a problem. So you have to stay open to it. But I'm also going to be leaning on people heavy to explain, okay, how much footprint do you have? What's your utilization? What are you using with the last bonds that we put out, which were quite generous? But we do have to recognize that how higher education occurred has changed probably for the near decade future, just like how things have changed in business and in other sectors. So I'm going to be asking a lot of questions.
Carol, what do you think about Senator Alvarado? What do you think about TRBs?
Yeah, I always support them. You know, we're hopefully we're not going to always be in this situation where we're, you know, doing everything virtually. But my hope is that, you know, we can at some point in the future return to a normal environment, and those TRBs are important, and they also create jobs. They're also putting people to work, and we have to continue to invest in our higher education system. We have to plan for the future. Now, I would say to anyone in the higher ed community who's looking for that, reassess, maybe readapt, change some things, and maybe downsize a bit. But I think it's important to try to stay on track with our TRBs.
One of the other, thanks for both of you for that, the answer to that, direct answers to that. Let me ask you, one of the questions we got is what your opinion is about the legislature extending the public school hold harmless funding going into the spring semester when it's ending as currently.
We've extended it all the way through the fall. What we're talking about is, I'll try to make this quick, Kirk. There's about $14 billion worth of reserve funds in all of public education out there. There's about 130,000 ADA equivalent students that are gone, okay? Now, about 40% of them are pre-K and K. I believe those kids are coming back. We'll find them rapidly.
And ADA, for people who are listening, is average daily attendance.
That is right. Sorry, we have so many nomenclatures, we can't get through them all sometimes. But now, what that means is we got about 80,000 kids that aren't there. Now, they're not there virtually and they're not there in classroom. I think the idea of having both is a great deal. So we have to keep the school system incentivized to find them, because they're either there and they're not coming, or they're gone somewhere else. Now, maybe it's homeschooling, maybe it's parochial schools, maybe it's private. I don't know where they are at this point, and we're going to get some good data. And I think the data we get in January will be a long way to going how long we extend. Do we extend it for all the grades? Do we extend it for just K and pre-K? What are we going to do? Because there's been huge changes in attendance in public schools as well.
Senator, you want to add anything to that?
Just, I'm having conversations with all of my superintendents, in fact, very soon and this is one of the topics we're going to discuss. So I'm going to get some feedback from them. But in my largest school district, Houston, we have, you know, over 7,600 students that are just gone. They never logged on to anything. Where are they? How are they learning? What are they doing? So that's a lot to take into consideration. I'm really concerned about this generation of students.
Yeah, the answer to that question, and then actually the answer to the TRB question has caused me to want to ask this question as well, and I want to keep us on track. But who's leading on broadband? I mean, there's talk of, you know, as Senator Bettencourt says, maybe you don't need that much space anymore because we're all doing things virtually. Well, you know, not everybody's able to do it virtually. One of the problems with schools and certainly even in higher ed, having virtual classes, is someone leading, is someone out front right now on broadband? And I know we talk a lot about it in rural areas, but it's also true in the urban areas. This is a state, in my view, this ought to be a state priority. Is somebody leading on that, and what's happening in that regard?
Well, Carol, go ahead if you got it.
I've seen a very strong bipartisan effort on that. I know there's been, we've seen some leadership generate in the House. I know Senator Nichols in the Senate has been outspoken about that. Look, like I said, there are a lot of disparities that many of us have been aware of, whether it's been health disparities or disparities in the digital divide. we've known this. So I'm glad that there's finally getting some attention on this, but I think we're going to see both Democrats and Republicans coming together and making sure that we have access to it to expand.
Well, and to continue that, well, first off, yes, there's going to be, Senator Nichols we're already talking about broadband for rural, because literally they're back with the AT&T copper phone wire that goes out on telegraph poles, to get to some of these rural co-ops and that type of thing. So that activity is ongoing. I agree with Senator Alvarado. There's a lot of discussion about what to do with broadband. Look, when we fired up virtual learning, we had some crashes. Some of the major ISD systems just shut down because they couldn't handle it. They didn't have the bandwidth to get through the portals, the information that they had to, and get it back to the kids and the teachers. Now, that's been improved dramatically in the last couple of months, because there's nothing like having a lab test of the entire state of Texas to try to do it online like that.
Yeah.
Now the governor put in $420 million of his $6 billion into this problem. So he's seen it and he's leading on it for PCs and improvements. I know a lot that's going to end up in HISD and other ISDs that are in Carroll's and my districts. I've got a small part of HISD too. So we're all looking at it, because it's not the wave of the future. It is the future, and the future right now. Is here today.
Yeah. Well, that's good. People will be happy to hear that. Well, I got to say, this has been fun for me. Like I said, it's neat to have two of my friends and former colleagues being part of the Hobby Hour. Thank you both for a fun discussion, and I knew it would be, and I knew it'd be informative. I'm going to mention a couple things. One is that there's been Senator Bettencourt made reference to the energy transition. Watch what's going on at U of H Energy and the Hobby School of Public Affairs. In fact, this Friday at noon, we're going to be having some discussion about a survey that was recently conducted. And in addition to that, there's a lot of really good work going on with regard to the energy transition at U of H. In addition to that, I want to say thanks to Senator Bettencourt for bringing up the polling data. And I want to thank and here's why. We do a lot of research at the Hobby School, and we're proud of that. In this case, our senior director, Renee Cross, one of our fellows who's also at Rice, Dr. Mark Jones, and of course, the godfather of polling in the state of Texas, Dr. Richard Murray. They were very accurate in what they were putting together with regard to that poll. And I think it's important to acknowledge them.
See, a Republican acknowledged the Hobby, center being right.
It's the Hobby School.
I know, it's a Hobby School, yeah. Right.
But I appreciate that. That's a nice acknowledgement. That's why I want to emphasize it. So we do this every third Wednesday at noon. But in January, the third Wednesday is January 20th. And I'm told there's something big happening in Washington, D.C. on January 20th.
I think Senator Alvarado was out of town on that day, but I'm not. I'm here.
So January 20th, of course, is the inaugural of the president. And so we're going to not be having the Hobby Hour in January. Our next one will be the third Wednesday in February. And we'll be watching on social media, because we will be letting you know who's doing that. And if you want to register, we've put the link to register for the February Hobby Hour in the chat room. Senator Bettencourt, Senator Alvarado, good luck in the legislative session. I'll be in touch, and if there's anything, that's right. And if there's anything we can do for you at the Hobby School of Public Affairs, let us know. To all those listening, everybody, have a happy holiday season. Merry Christmas to you, and here's to a better 2021 that's hopeful. Well, I'm hopeful about it. Everybody stay safe, happy, and healthy, and wear your mask. God bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's right. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.